This video is on how to clean the CZ P10 F45. This will also apply to the other CZ P10 variants. To get started, you'll need a few things. A nylon brush specific for gun cleaning, a 45 caliber bronze bore brush. You can use nylon, but I prefer bronze. A 45 caliber brass jag, CLP, which stands for cleaner, lubricant, and protectant, gun oil, and yes, you can get away with just using CLP, but I like to use a dedicated lubricant. Cotton swabs with an angled tip, microfiber gun cleaning rags, a cleaning rod, a 45 caliber bore snake, cleaning patches, and powder-free nitrile gloves. And I'll leave links to all these items in the video description below. You should always start out with a clear and safe weapon, meaning no ammunition, but of course we're going to double check. Keep your finger off the trigger and keep it pointed in a safe direction. Press the magazine release button, drop the magazine. Make sure the chamber is clear. To do that, locate the slide stop lever. Press the slide stop lever upward as you're pulling the slide back to its rearmost position, and you'll feel the slide stop lock into place. Now we can see there's no magazine, and if I look down the chamber, I don't see any brass, so there's no ammunition inside the chamber. So we are 100% clear and safe. Press the slide stop lever downward. Let the slide go back to its original position. Now you'll have to pull the trigger. Locate the slide lock, which has two sides. It's got a left and a right side. You're going to need to pull both down at the same time. So as you're pulling down on both sides of the slide lock, pull the slide back just a little bit, just a hair, and you'll feel it give. Just like that. Now you can release the slide from the frame. To remove the recoil spring assembly, compress it from chamber end to muzzle end. Now you can press the top of the chamber to remove the barrel. And that's as far as you need to go for a basic field strip. You have the frame, the recoil spring assembly, the barrel, the slide, and the magazine. You don't have to clean these parts in any particular order. Today I'm going to start with the barrel. I'm going to add CLP to the brush and start scrubbing. If I'm going too fast on anything, just press pause and rewind as needed. And if I'm going too slow, just tap the fast forward button a couple times and you can skim forward. Attach the bore brush to the cleaning rod. Add a little CLP. I'm only going to push the bore brush through in one direction, from chamber end to muzzle end, because it doesn't make any sense at all to push the dirt out and pull it right back in. So what I do is I push the bore brush through. When it comes out through the muzzle end, I remove the brush, pull the cleaning rod out, and start the process over again. It's kind of like sweeping the floor. You don't just sweep back and forth, you'll spread dust everywhere. You sweep in one general direction, out the door or into a dustpan. As you're pushing the rod through, make sure you're holding it by the handle. Holding the handle allows the rod to spin freely, which allows the bore bristles to spin freely within the rifling, and you'll get a better clean that way. There's no specific number of times you need to push the brush through. It really depends on how much you've been shooting. In this case, I'm just going to push it through a few times and move on. Now attach the brass jag. Yeah, you can use plastic if you want to, but I just prefer brass. Add a little CLP to a cleaning patch. Wrap the patch around the jag. And just like the bore brush, we're going to push it through in one direction from chamber end to muzzle end. You'll see that the first patch comes out really dirty. Just keep pushing clean patches through until they start to come out clean. Okay, it took a few patches, but this one's pretty much clean. Let me check it out. Yep, that's good enough for me. Now for the bore snake, I'm just going to make sure I'm using the right one. It should say 45 right there in the brass weight. Drop the weight in through the chamber end and pull it out the muzzle end. You only need to do this a couple of times and you should be good. It's kind of hard to show on camera, but this is exactly why I use a bore snake every time. It looks like smooth black glass inside there. There's not even a speck of dirt or lint. Now I'm just going to wipe off the excess CLP. I'm going to add a couple of drops of gun oil, and then I'll smooth it out with a cotton swab. So now I have a light protective coating over the entire barrel, and it's time to move on to the next piece. Before I start cleaning the slide, I want to show you a couple of parts to avoid leaking CLP or oil into. The first area is the breech face. Try to avoid leaking CLP or gun oil into that little hole right there. That's where the firing pin comes out of. If you leak too much oil in there, it could slow down the firing pin over time. And the same thing with the striker channel or firing pin channel. That's this area here. If you leak a little bit in there, it's not the end of the world. It's just something you don't want to do all the time. As you're brushing the inside of the slide, you may get a little CLP residue in there. Just clean it out with a cotton swab and make sure it's dry, and you should be good. So add CLP to the nylon brush and start scrubbing all surfaces inside and out, with the exception of those two areas I showed you. Well, let me clarify. You do want to clean the breech face. You just want to make sure not to leak CLP down into that little hole that I showed you. So if you think that's going to happen, just point the slide downward as you're cleaning it. I like to use the smaller end of the nylon brush to get into the harder to reach spaces. If you don't have a gun cleaning brush, a toothbrush will work in a pinch, but the con is you're not going to have that smaller end to get into the harder to reach areas. And be sure to clean behind the extractor. That's that little piece that looks like a hook next to the breech face. I'm also going to use the smaller end of the brush to clean in between the rail channels. And here's the area I was talking about earlier. This is the breech face. You got to make sure it's clean because that part gets really dirty. So I'm just going really light on the CLP, but I'm going to scrub it the best that I can. And also these areas right here. This part here collects a lot of carbon and fouling when you're shooting. Now I'm just going to wipe off the excess CLP. Now I'm going to add CLP to a clean cotton swab and go through it in fine detail. I'm going to pay particular attention to the rails. I want to make sure that those are perfectly clean so that the slide operates smoothly when it's on the frame. The first few cotton swabs will come out dirty. Just keep running clean cotton swabs until they start to come out clean. I'm just going to wipe the firing pin channel just to make sure I didn't get any excess CLP in there, and that looks clean and dry, so I think we're good. As I mentioned earlier, you can get away with just using CLP if you like, but I prefer to use gun oil on the high friction areas. I also like to use it as a light protective coating, especially if I know it's going to be in storage for a while. So whether you're using CLP or gun oil for this part, go ahead and add the gun oil or CLP to the cotton swab and run it through the rail channels and over anything else that shows signs of metal on metal wear. So just to recap on what I just did, I loosened up all the dirt with a nylon brush, wiped it off, added CLP to a clean cotton swab, and went through it in fine detail. And after that, I wiped off the excess CLP, and then I'm going through and adding a light coat of lube to anything that shows signs on metal wear, and I'd say a medium coat of lube to the rails. I'm almost done with the slide. This gun's going to be in storage for a while, so I'm going to add a little bit of gun oil to the rag and wipe the outside of the slide just to add a light protective coating. If this is a carry gun for you, I'd make sure that the slide serrations are dry. You want to avoid having anything slippery on anything that you need to grab onto. And the same goes for the frame, which we're going to do next. Add CLP to the nylon brush and start scrubbing all surfaces. And yes, you want to do the grip also. We're not going to leave it greasy or runny or anything like that. We're going to make sure it's completely dry before we're finished. I wouldn't skip cleaning the outside of the frame unless you don't mind getting lead contaminants all over your hand every time you pick up your gun. The easiest way to remove the CLP from the stippling is just wrap a rag around it and squeeze. Now I'm going to remove all the excess CLP from the outside of the frame, And I didn't show it on camera, but you also want to remove the excess CLP from the inside of the magazine well. Now that you've loosened up all the dirt with a nylon brush, add CLP to a clean cotton swab and go through it in fine detail. Just continue changing cotton swabs until they start to come out clean. Now I'm going to wipe off the excess CLP. I'm just going to add a little bit of gun oil to the rails and anything else that shows signs of metal on metal wear. I'm just going to check and make sure I didn't leave any excess COP or gun oil on the grip, and that looks pretty good. Everything's dry. Yep, it's good to go. Now let's move on to the recoil spring assembly. Add CLP to the nylon brush and start scrubbing. You can remove the large spring. It's not going to matter which way you put it back on, so don't worry too much about that. So start scrubbing in between the coils and anything else you can get. Then you wipe it off, and that's about it. If you need to disassemble the magazine, I really don't think you need a video to show you how to do it. Just press that button at the bottom of the base plate. The base plate slides off, the spring and follower come out. Clean everything with CLP, wipe it dry, and put it together the same way it came out. But you don't need to do that unless you dropped it in mud, dirt, sand, or something like that. In this case, I'm just going to give it a quick clean and wipe down. So go very light on the CLP and make sure you don't leak CLP down into the follower or these witness holes. I'm just going to add a little bit of CLP to the nylon brush and start scrubbing, or you can add CLP to the cleaning rag and wipe it down that way if you prefer. So I've cleaned it well, but I'm going to make sure to wipe off all of the excess CLP. If you leave it wet, it has the potential to collect dirt and lint. I'm just going to give it one final inspection to make sure it's clean and dry. And that looks pretty good. Everything's clean and properly lubricated. Nothing's been oversaturated. Time to reassemble. Insert the barrel back into the slide. Now take the recoil spring with the open end of the spring going muzzle in first. The flat end of the spring is going to go against this cutout I'll show you a close-up of right now. Just compress the spring until you get the flat end of the spring flush on the cutout. And make sure it's perfectly straight. And it should look just like this. Now line up the rails on the frame with the rails on the slide. Continue pulling the slide all the way back. Now let's do a function check. Pull the trigger, but don't release it. Now work the slide. Now release the trigger. You should hear and feel it reset. Now pull it again. If you hear a click, you're good. Now let's make sure it locks back on an empty magazine. So insert empty magazine. And when I pull the slide back, it should lock back on its own without using the slide stop lever. If it does, you're good to go. I recommend cleaning your firearm after every use, regardless of round count. And if you're not using it, clean it once a year. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, subscribe to my channel and visit skullcrush.com.